Hundreds of Texas school districts plan to use a controversial new elementary curriculum that includes biblical references. This optional Bible-infused program is called Bluebonnet Learning for K-5 public schools. The Texas Education Board approved it last year. It's a story the Texas Tribune just released today, and reporter Jaden Edison joins us live to discuss it. Good afternoon, Jaden. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, Jane, your reporting shows about 1 in 4 school districts plan to use this program. Can you break down the numbers for us?
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, we were able to obtain the data through an open records request. And what we were able to find was that specifically when it related to the reading and language arts curriculum, kindergarten through 5, as you mentioned, we saw more than 300 districts who signaled plans to use some version of the reading curriculum. Now, it's important to note that that data is preliminary, and basically, that means that, that number could still grow potentially, or, districts who have maybe at some point earlier in the year signaled an intent to use it, there's an opportunity or there's a chance maybe that they won't use it. And so, again, it's preliminary, but it gives us really an early glimpse into what the demand looks like for this program that drew so much attention last year when it was approved by the State Board of Education.
And Jane, where are we seeing those schools? Like what areas? Are you seeing any trends?
Right. So we are still analyzing the data, but some of the early things that jumped out at us, or at least, to me, as I was kind of going through it is, you did see, and I spoke with a number of really rural Texas school districts, right? These were districts that really spoke a lot about having, a high student population of those who are on free or reduced lunch, which is really an indicator of low income here in Texas and how that's measured as it relates to, what they call here economically disadvantaged. And so with this curriculum comes a $60 per student incentive to be able to, put that toward things like printing costs and different materials that districts otherwise may not be able to get. And so that was one of the things that stood out to me in some of these interviews and conversations is that, those that have kind of a high financial need, they adopted the materials not necessarily for the religious components, but for some of that financial relief, given the needs of their student body.
We'll talk about the financial aspect here in just a few seconds. So first, any of those schools in the Austin area?
Yeah, so actually Austin, was one, if you look at the state basically is broken up into 20 kind of regions, if you will. It's probably the best, most simple way to explain it. Austin was near the bottom of the list when it came to the preliminary kind of adoption rates, right? So along with, places like the Beaumont region and the El Paso region. So you didn't see a lot of traction, at least in the early data when it came to kind of Austin area districts, though, we'll have a more complete picture at some point in the early fall when the Texas Education Agency publishes the official data. But again, the early data suggests that not much interest so far from the Austin area districts and charter schools.
Gotcha, Jaden. Now, you talked to more than, I think, a dozen school districts. How big of a factor did the financial incentive play into the program's adoption?
Right. Yeah. So we reached out to over a dozen and were able to talk to a good sample size of folks who have got back to us, on that. And really, to be completely honest with you, the financial component probably played, a significant role, the most significant role other than just wanting alignment, right? One thing that was, kind of something that the state had promoted when it came to Bluebonnet was being able to provide, curriculum alignment across the board, right? The state wanted to, or at least it expressed that it wanted to help ensure that teachers weren't spending so much time on lesson planning. And so therefore it's scripted kind of format. And the fact that the state developed the materials can kind of take away some of that pressure and time that teachers spend in the classroom here in Austin and beyond. And so that was one component, but make no mistake about it, the financial component was huge, right? It was huge in that, districts, there was one, superintendent, who spoke about, anytime you have money attached to something that is related to education or, curriculum or materials that can help your students, districts have to take a serious look at that. And so that was certainly the case when it came to the Bluebonnet reading materials this time around.
Jane, we're running out of time, but I've got to ask you, what are critics saying about what is wrong with teaching the Bible?
Yeah, it's the difference between preaching and teaching, right? And I think, some of what we heard all of last year was that, that is something that should be reserved for Sunday schools, right? And parents should ultimately have the control and the say of how their kids learn about religion. There are also kind of constitutional concerns when it comes to whether or not a government or schools should be, promoting religion and or if it rises to the level of endorsing a particular religion, which we know is prohibited by the Constitution. And so a lot of concerns about that. But generally speaking, we'll see what happens. Schools have a lot of flexibility when it comes to how they use curriculum. And so ultimately, just because we see the adoption rate now doesn't necessarily mean that kids are learning, biblical lessons. Want to make that clear. But obviously, there is some demand for it, but the rest of the story remains to be told. And we'll see how things kind of develop here over the next, several weeks and months.
Yeah, we'll count on you to update us. Jaden Edison with the Texas Tribune, thank you so much for your time.